Good evening. We'll call to order the regular meeting of the Los Olivos Community Services District Board of Directors of October 12th, 2022. Can we have the roll call, Mr. Savage?
President Fayram?
Here.
Vice President Ross?
Here.
Director Arme?
Here.
Director Nelson?
Here.
Director Palmer?
Here.
And next we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will move to item 4, public comments. The members of the public may address board items of interest but not on the agenda. Mr. Savage, do we have any?
Yeah. Keith, is this general public comment?
Yeah. Okay. Let me go first.
So we'll start with Mr. Sarlus.
Oh, great. Wow, that was nice.
And since you're standing.
Hey, well, thank you. I just wanted to say, number one, thank you to all the board for doing such a great job for our little town, and we're very thankful. I'm very thankful for a very thankless position that you guys are performing, and I really appreciate it. The one thing I wanted to bring up is the fact that I hope you're giving the same amount of effort across all options. One of the things I was kind of thinking about and hoping for, and I just wanted to say out loud, is to see a beautiful package for all of the holders or the stakeholders in the position, where we could see from the very big municipality all the way down to the small solution for a general home. I've seen success with a lot of, from living in a big city and tying into a big pipeline is great, but the amount of cost and everything that we're going to put into it seems immense. When in fact, if you're a house in this district and you have a failure, now you can put in an advanced treatment system in your front yard. And maybe that's a way to look at what we're doing. And so my question to you, the thing I'm asking for really, is to see a wholehearted agnostic approach to all the different levels that you guys are pursuing. Pursuing something as small as a home being able to take care of itself, which I've always liked, and having a solution for a downtown corridor. The biggest piece of that puzzle for me is a couple of things. One, leapfrogging technologies. I fully assume that within the next few years, 5 to 10, this is going to be happening smaller and smaller and smaller. And pretty soon a toilet's going to be able to do it. The thing I, as a community, don't want to see, and not that I love Los Alamos and it's great, but new building has gone up and it has definitely changed the character of the town. I am in love with our town. We have an 1886 building that I provide for my children out of. And seeing a town that is 100% based upon tourism and seeing streets torn up and infrastructure put in that may be leapfrogged in the not too distant future is very concerning, not only to me, but I know the $50 to $100 million that is generated each year by those tasting rooms and other ancillary businesses on our main street. I know you're doing it. I know you're doing everything you can to make the right decision. I'm just saying, pros and cons all the way across. This one's expensive, but this one increases property values, but you can't say just put a restaurant in any single building. And then finally, the solution of, hey, the water's great around here. We have an advanced water treatment system. If your septic system fails, you pull it out and you put in a new advanced treatment. Again, thank you for all of your effort, but please just take all of that into consideration for a small town. And as one of the stakeholders, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. So I'm headed back out to a winery now. Thank you very much. I'm glad I got to go first. See you guys.
Thank you. Next speaker is Michelle DeWord.
There are seats up front, by the way, for those that are standing. Come on up front, plenty of seats.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Michelle DeWord. I have through a few exhibits I have questions about, and I see that we took off of future agenda items on your agenda. So I'd like to ask for answers to these questions to be either a workshop planned or answers on an agenda item. I have a June 19th workshop that Mr. O'Neill, Board Member O'Neill, had presented. And the workshop, this was in June of 2019, and it started with a local phased approach endorsed by the Regional Water Quality Board, County EHS, 3rd District Board Supervisor Joan Hartman, City of Solvang, and majority of residents. And it talked about a phased approach. The phase 1, the highest density area, commercial core, and beware, larger and more complex a project, the harder to permit, greater risk, greater cost, and schedule overruns. Then the next steps, on the next slide, it talks about the priority, and the first priority was to conduct groundwater studies to determine the future. Then following June 19, and there was August, there was a resolution that was passed, and the resolution was well written, it's very detailed. It looks like it was written by a lawyer. And it talks about the commercial core area that has been selected as the location for the initial phase, phase 1 under this program. They identified this is the area of the highest density use and nitrate loading, and has been recommended for action. So then we had, and previous to that, we have the Santa Barbara County wastewater management plan that I'm looking at. And that talks about the prioritization of the inner core of downtown. Then 5 years later now, we have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on assessments. And it's a plan that is for the entire town, not starting with the inner core. What happened? Where is it that there should be some resolution, or there should have been a board vote to authorize this spending of this exorbitant amount of spending on site plans? There was 3 with this company, somebody. I think that I don't understand where the hearing was when the project description changed. And I think as residents that we should have had some notification before this turned into a giant super sewer. And I have to say, once again, we are not protected by our zoning laws. There's a lot of ag land just north of us, a super sewer system. It can be expanded, and you could have, I think, giant super sewer systems are a device for growth and sprawl. And I certainly hope we're not going down that path. I hope we can pull back and reverse the course direction. And please, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Catherine Rohr. Ms. Rohr, I'd note that you have public comment, item 6B, but you also listed item 7C.
Mm-hmm.
Item 7C is not an action item, so if you can include your comments in public
Oh, I
comment.
can't address the general manager's 6-month report?
It's not an action item.
Oh.
So
You can still
take
address it.
number.
It's an agenda item.
You
There's
have
no
items
public
4
comment.
and 6B.
Right, I just wanted, but can you clarify? I'm so sorry, please don't
It's
start
not
the
an action.
clock.
It's not an action item.
The public's not allowed to speak to that at that time, is what you're
We've
saying.
been
There's no
consistent
public
on that action items are where public comment is. So you have public comment.
You've been
as well.
consistent on that for the last couple of
Your time
months.
started.
So let's go ahead.
Go.
As we head into yet another meeting, in which I can see from the agenda packet, you're all teed up to tell us how you're studying all the options. I want to say that that is horse hockey. Please stop saying it. It is not true. You know it is not true, yet you keep saying it to people. If you want me to stop coming to your meetings and bringing it up, stop lying. I've said it nicely for months now. Now we're done. Stop telling people you are studying all the options. The CSD has been in existence for over 4 years now, and you're really okay sitting up there and looking at us and telling us now you need to start studying all the options. Why don't you tell us about all the time and money you spent between late 2018 and June 2021, that's over 3 years of collecting assessment fees and using grant monies funded by the taxpayers on the plan you pledged to all of us that you were pursuing. Remember that plan? I didn't make that plan up. You did. You sold this town on it, and you spent a lot of money on it. Just because you changed now And now you want your super sewer, as Michelle calls it, the one that every parcel in the community is going to be forced to connect to and forced to pay to connect to on top of their assessment fees, which you keep not stressing for people. That was never supposed to be an option. That was the one thing you told us wasn't going to be an option, because that was the big government approach that was inappropriate for this town. That's what you told us. Make eye contact with me. One of you, please, for the love of God, this is not a joke. The decisions you are making have an effect on the members of this entire community. That's not just the voters who own land inside the district, Mr. Savage. That is everyone who lives in this community. You will change the character of this beautiful community forever with your actions. Please stop. That's all. I don't know how else to say it to you. I'm trying to be as direct as I can now. Stop, please.
Thank you, Ms. Rohr. And our final public speaker, is Paul Rohr.
Hey, just really quickly, I think I'm saying a lot of the same things everybody else has said, and there's a dilemma. So the dilemma is this, is that you guys selected a plan between last August and last February, right? You selected a site and you selected a plan. You never unselected the site or the plan. You selected them, but as there's been pushback, you've said, oh no, we haven't really selected it. Nope, 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 studying everything. And the problem is you keep getting caught for that because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. There's a dilemma. There's a conflict. So let me give an example. Mr. Savage wrote a couple of letters, I think, to Newshawk, and then another one went on one of the social media sites. And arguably, it's campaign related, but let's put that aside. What's interesting to me is, what he said is, he was like, oh, we've made all this progress in the last 4 years. Well, I think he's actually right. Right, I think he's telling the truth there. You've made a lot of progress on doing this one thing, right? You've selected the Little Creek site, and you've selected your giant gravity-fed sewer. So you have made progress on that, right? Now, if you haven't done that, and we're just looking now at everything, like you're saying, if that's really going on, then we have a question, right? Then we go to, wow, it's been 4 years, $250,000 a year in assessments, plus I think by your estimates, $280,000 in grants. So let's say, roughly speaking, $1.3 million in funds in 4 years. So if we're really just looking at stuff for the first time now, which is what you're saying, then I'd say, yeah, you've done a really bad job. Now, if you want to say, no, we've selected a site and we've selected how we're going to do it, we're just like, what's the saying, putting some lipstick on a pig mouth to keep you folks quiet, well, that would be different. Then I think you could say you've made progress. But I think you have to choose a lane, right? You have to choose a lane, which one you're going down, and not try and just keep covering up with the idea that you haven't made a decision. And I'm going to bring this up later when I speak, because it's evidence in each thing that you do that you have made a decision. It's embedded in everything you do. You can't just lie about stuff and think that facts will go away. Right? I mean, that's the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rohr. That's the end of public comment.
You've got two online.
Oh,
Mr. President.
thank you. Okay.
Anna Marie Gott and I think it's Mark Lethal.
Okay. Ms. Gott.
Good afternoon, good evening, board members. First, I wanted to say that I was thrilled to watch the candidate forum that we had last week, and I really appreciated some of the candidates' suggestions about having additional workshops, perhaps having bi-monthly meetings for residents, and also thinking about allowing residents or stakeholders to be on committees that might be able to bring things forward to the board. I would volunteer for any of that if it's remote. But one of the things that has come up again and again, which is that we do have some people in our community that this is going to be a financial hardship for. And I, in July, spoke with Diane Jemerson at the Water Boards, and she put me in touch with some people over at the Rural Community Assistance Corporation. And what they can do is they can actually, if we, start the ball rolling with a survey that goes out to all of the owners of all of the properties to find out if we have some people that are, closer to the median income or in the poverty index, that those people, if we get enough of them, we might be able to have additional funding that is spent specifically on their systems, whatever that might be, so that they will not have to pay exorbitant amounts, or if anything. So I would like to really just suggest that we reach out to the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, or have Guy do that, and find out what that process is and how we might be able to implement that in Los Olivos, to see if we can actually get more grant funding for some people in the district. The other thing I wanted to address is the fact that everyone wants Los Olivos to remain Los Olivos. We don't want to see all of this sprawl. So I suggest that we get the attorney for the CSD and the board together, as well as community members, and look at how we can ensure that, one, we do not have an expansion of the commercial area, and that how we can actually, when it comes to a vote, ensure that we are not going to be supersizing the commercial development downtown. We could do this by limiting the amount of the development annually. We could do this by saying that we're not going to have any additional restaurants.
Thank you, Ms. Scott.
There's all sorts of different things that we can do, and that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can turn this on. And our last public speaker is Mr. Hertel. Mr. Hertel?
Hey, Mark, you're on mute.
I know I sounded pretty good to myself there, but I was on mute. Anyways, good evening, board members. I wanted to echo what Mr. Sarlo said, that just to make sure that we truly are, this board is truly looking at a number of these different options on collection and treatment, and looking at the flows. The flows, I think the reality is you guys did make a pretty significant departure from the original plan that so much work went into, and now I think it's an engineering exercise, and that engineering exercise has shown how much capacity you can have, and that is so much greater than we currently have in town. I think your current plan is a developer's dream. They are going to be salivating over this because there are so many properties in Los Olivos with historical buildings on that could be taken down, and you could have a 2-story with residential upstairs and restaurants downstairs, which in our current zoning. So the misnomer that our zoning is protecting the character is baloney, because our zoning already allows that. Wastewater has been the limiting factor. So I think I just need to make sure this board knows that the decisions you guys are making from an engineering standpoint will have dramatic impact on this town. It's not, Mr. Ross, it's not just the cheapest, like you said in the debate. Everything has consequence, so this has to be delicately looked at and make sure that we're doing the right thing for the environment and the right thing for the rural nature of this town. And right now, I don't think that's being factored in nearly enough. And our zoning can change with one supervisor's vote, and we just had a redistricting. So I think the majority of people in town, even the commercial property owners, they all appreciate that the rural eclectic nature of Los Olivos is the gem. And trying to do a good thing, we could completely destroy that. And there's so much out of the area money trying to come into Los Olivos. We're not just any town, we're a town that has an Auberge hotel opening up, and Los Olivos is on the map now globally. And that money will come in, and that money will maximize it, and the residents will no longer recognize their town. And so this board needs to realize that. You need to keep your options open. You need to keep your own personal preferences towards technologies agnostic. Otherwise, it's going to lose, and it'll end up in lawsuits. I guarantee you. And those attorneys will be much greater than our little district could ever find. I guarantee that. So please just keep our options open. Let's give the residents all the information on the options. Let's not rush it. Let's have good debate and discussion, and let's let the residents of Los Olivos figure out what they want, not 5 elected board members. It's got to be the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hertel, and that completes public comment. So we will move on then to item 5, which are comments. Item 5A will be director comments. So why don't I start to my right and Director Nelson.
Well, great segue, although I didn't know that anybody was going to say what they said, but I have heard a rumor that I and other candidates will put a wastewater treatment plant at Los Olivos Elementary School. And I want to address that, saying that's not true in its entirety of what's being said. The actual conversation was between the candidates, myself, Ms. Kennedy, Mr. Parks, Dr. Parks, Ms. Hollingsworth, Mr. Hertel, and although our pilot was there, he wasn't listening to us, he was flying the plane, on a trip we took at the benefit of the whole group to Oregon, sponsored by Mr. Hertel, and we went to the Orenco plant in Oregon last Tuesday, the day before the candidate forum. Everybody was invited and we were the ones that went. Some had other things and couldn't go, and that's fine. After viewing the plants and on the return flight, we all became involved in a conversation of what we saw, what we thought, where it could be applied, what could be done. And it came back to the original decentralized plan, focusing on the central core, and then to the phases. We talked about a bunch of different things, whether it be a cluster type thing. And yes, it was talked about at the school, but not an above the ground treatment plant like is cited for Little Creek. It was a below the ground passive type system that would then provide irrigation water for the school playground if in fact that were able to be developed in a partnership with the school. I'm available. The other thing about that is if that were to happen, if a partnership like that did occur, the symbiotic relationship with the school would save the taxpayers between $2,500 and $3,000 a month for irrigation for the school. And I don't think that's chicken feed. When you add that all up, it would help. It'd be something that would help everybody. Not saying that's the plan, I'm just saying it was something that was talked about, and we liked the idea of doing something for the community that helped relieve costs in addition to providing the system. So if anybody at any time has any question about where I stand and what I've got to say, feel free to contact me. I sit at the park, I'll talk to people, I'll meet with you anywhere at any time and talk to you. So I'm around. So that's all I've got to say with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Nelson. We'll go to Director Army.
I have nothing.
We'll go to Director Palmer.
Yeah, just very briefly, I met with Congressman Carbajal and Senator Lamone last week at an event, just very briefly, but mentioned the project, mentioned where we are. The community workshop process we'll be going into sometime next year, and the fact that we're going to be looking to them to help us, A, understand our funding options, and B, if those align with our, whatever the project ultimately is, we'll be looking to them for some help in securing and advocating for that funding. So we'll just be following up with them as we move forward. So that's what I have on district business.
All right. Director Russ.
One thing I would like everyone to keep in mind is that there is no rule that says the Los Olivos CSD has to succeed. We want it to, but it may not be successful. We may find that there are no options that the district residents or landowners like that we can afford. So what happens? The state will come in We know what happens because we've seen it happen in Los Olivos. And I've talked to people that live there, and they are astounded at how much it costs for their wastewater treatment. So how do we avoid a Los Olivos situation? We need to work together. We don't need a lot of independent efforts. We need to work together, because this board will not decide how we're going to move forward. You all are going to have to vote. We are trying to get options together, and the comment made earlier was exactly right. We want to give every option a reasonable assessment so that we can present it so that you all can understand what your options are. And we're not ready for that yet, but hopefully in the next few months or early next year, we'll be in that position to start discussing the options. And we're going to encourage input. We just don't want people working off independently, because that's not going to help us succeed. So please talk to us, send us emails, general manager. We want to consider everything that makes any kind of sense so that we can succeed. But as far as controlling growth, I can tell you right now, if the state comes in, it's going to be a big plant, and it's going to allow for all the stuff you don't want in terms of growth. So we really need to succeed as the Los Olivos CSD.
Is that it? Thank you, Director Ross. I just have two items. One is I also had a meeting with Congressman Carvajal's office. I believe it was last Friday. I believe his staff was in town, and we talked about federal funding options as well. Have talked to the Congressman's office off and on about this issue for some time, and so I had that meeting as well. The other item that I'm working on setting up is a lot of the discussion about the densification and the increased development. I think over several meetings I've stated that concern myself. In fact, I believe I asked our council questions about that. So I have contacted Supervisor Hartman's office to arrange a meeting with the planning department and potentially the environmental health services to understand that. And then along that line, I also recognize that we have some work to do on the flow and the capacity of the plant, because I have some of the same questions I think that Mr. Hertel had on the sizing of the plant. And the sizing, my opinion is the sizing of the plant needs to be for the existing development only, and not for anything else. Aside from vacant parcels have a right to develop, but I share the concerns of additional densification on existing development, and so I'm going to be hopefully meeting with them at some point. I have not heard when that would be. So that's all I have. I think we will then move on to.
Can I piggyback on one thing? I'm sorry, just
sure,
that you brought up President Fayram, and that is that we're closely tracking the county housing element. The county's housing element update is underway, right? And late October is when they're supposed to release the draft of potential up zones. So I think this dovetails with the work Tom's doing, with that coming down the pike, and every jurisdiction having to submit housing element updates by beginning of next year. We're looking at that closely, and again, as Tom said, working with P&D and the supervisor's office to make sure we understand and inoculate or blunt for that.
So I'll be talking with Mr. Savage, in the future of how we come back and make sure we have a close look on what the flow and the capacity of any option that's selected is. So next we have the general manager and district engineer comments. Mr. Savage, who's going to go first?
I don't think District Engineer Pike has anything tonight, so I guess I'm going to go first. Is that correct? Okay. All right. So let me share my screen for a couple of different things here that is typical for what I do at this part of our discussion. So, as typical, I can give a brief kind of project status summary, update of the things that are going on. Talked last month about obtaining better estimates from GSI and our ground well driller. There are some estimates in tonight's packet. Not in the packet because I just found out today is that the driller, if we decide to do that, can begin drilling that first well on November 8th. The effluent study, this is the effluent disposal study. So for those who aren't familiar with these terms, remember we collect things, they go through a treatment plant, and then we dispose of the effluent after that, meaning the water that comes out of the treatment plant. This study is looking at 5 options as to what we can do with that resulting water, highly treated. We expect the report sometime in the next 30 to 40 days, and GSI and Confluence, the 2 consultants, are on track to present that at our December meeting. Importantly with that one, that is the same meeting, for those who aren't aware. We seat our new board, so whoever's elected in November is seated in December. So that will be the new board hearing that, not the existing board.
Mr. Savage, maybe a question for council. The county certifies the election at some point, and I don't know when that date is. Do we seat before the certified based on the preliminary? Or?
It's typical, at least in the government code, it states the first Friday in December is when, after the certification, that's when the new directors come in. Okay. Traditionally, they're sworn in at the next available meeting after that.
Next after the certification, because I think the county
certification
has been,
and the Friday of this, the last Friday, the first Friday of December. Excuse me.
Okay, so if the county doesn't certify by the first Friday, we would seat anyway?
No, you have to wait until
We'd
the
have to wait.
certification.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for that.
So just track that, because I think they usually come back the first meeting in December, as I recall in the past, but.
Okay, I'll have to track that.
Okay.
My apologies if I got that wrong. I think it'd be a good, thank you for bringing that up though, because I think it'd be good for the new board to be seated and hear that presentation, because they're going to be the ones ultimately making decisions about it. So we might potentially kick that to January if that's the case, or we can decide whether to do it anyway in December. The next one is the assessment engineer. Now the assessment engineer, again, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a company called NV5 that's doing this effort for us. They build the financial models, big crazy spreadsheets with different data in them that talk about if and when we get to a successful vote, how property owners in the district will pay for things and their share of the pay of the overall bill. So the assessment engineer has completed his initial models. The finance committee, since it's a financial thing, will review them at their November meeting, and then plan is to bring the models, the initial models, to the November board meeting. Didn't have enough time to spend with the assessment engineer to make this meeting, so kicked it to November. I think that's appropriate. I'd note that other activities, so those are kind of the 3 big projects that are going on currently. There are a number of other efforts obviously going on throughout the month. So President Fayram and I presented, President Fayram did all the presenting, I was just attending really, at the most recent LAFCO meeting. My comments on that were, they were pretty supportive of our efforts. A number of folks commented that they really liked the report we gave them. It included data that they could use to help make decisions, and they commented about how much better our reports tend to be than other jurisdictions, so they're very happy with that. There were a number of comments after the LAFCO presentation that said to me they are anticipating us to come back. For those who don't know, the initial extension expires early next year. They do expect us to come back asking for a short extension. They see the kind of progress we are making and recognize that an extension is probably going to be needed. Independent of all that, I did meet with several different people from the County of San Luis Obispo, Supervisor Bruce Gibson's office, the Public Works Director, and some others, to get a better understanding of the history of the Los Olivos wastewater project, the 218 processes they went through, and some of the lessons learned. Obviously, we're a small district. We don't want to recreate issues that they created or ran into in Los Olivos. So I think there's some lessons learned, and it's always nice to learn from others and not just kind of go your own way and find out the same lessons someone else has learned. So oops, still working now. I intend to at some point early next year, maybe as part of what you'll see in a few minutes when I talk about what's coming down the road as far as the project plan is concerned, as part of some of those other presentations, maybe give a brief overview so some of you can also learn what happened in Los Osos and understand, you know, trials and tribulations that they went through. It's often referenced in here as far as, you know, a local district was formed, it failed, incurring large costs. Ultimately, the county built a wastewater treatment plant for them. That's the very, very condensed version of it. Independent of that, we received about 10 days ago, I think, or 2 weeks ago, we received a letter from the Regional Water Quality Board. This is one that we've been talking about and expecting from them for quite some time. We were expecting a response or a complimentary letter from County EHS. I expect that letter from EHS in the next week or so. For those who are interested in reading the letter from the Regional Water Quality Board, I did post it on the website, and I'll leave you to kind of decide what you think it means. I know what my feeling about it was. I'll leave my comments to myself. But it's posted, you can read it. We will, like I said, I do expect in the next week or so a similar or complimentary or response letter from County Environmental Health Services, EHS, Environmental Health Services. I'll post that one when I get it as well. EHS is scheduled to be at our November meeting. The LAMP, which is the document that governs, you know, how we do wastewater treatment at our homes, in our community, those sorts of things. They have been talking for quite some time about an addendum specific to the community of Los Olivos. They have a draft apparently that they want us to look at, so they'll be here in November to talk about the LAMP addendum. I'm hoping that we can combine kind of a report on the Regional Water Quality Control Board, EHS letters, with this presentation they'll be doing on the LAMP and the addendum to the LAMP. As it relates to some of and I'll show the usual options chart that I show in just a moment, but I'm still waiting on some updated numbers from Orenco Colosina on what costs would look like if we did step collection with an MBR treatment plant. The representatives from Colosina, I guess there's some massive trade show they've been gearing up for, and it ended yesterday. So I expect I'll hear from them in the next week or so. And for those who are interested in still some other alternatives as far as treatment are concerned, I continue to ping the Presby organization. Haven't heard back from them. I've let them know where we're at and the timelines we're looking at. So if they want to try and give us some information, I've told them, you know, they need to really get moving on that. And then last but not least on this list, to President Fayram's earlier comment, I'm working to set up a meeting, thanks to Supervisor Hartman's office, with County EHS and Planning and Building to better understand particularly ADUs, which was the question that was asked initially, but we could probably expand it beyond just ADUs. ADUs, accessory dwelling units, for those who aren't familiar with that term, on treatment plant sizing. We've talked a lot about how Stantec did include some expansion or capability rather within the treatment plant they spec for ADUs, but we want to understand how accurate or not are the assumptions that we made when we provided Stantec with the ADU numbers. So hopefully we can get that meeting here in the next week or 10 days. We'll see what happens there. This is the working draft of a roadmap that I continue to keep up to date with much help from the project management committee. So the way I've been kind of massaging this a little bit to try and make it a little easier to understand, putting it into a little bit smaller bite-sized pieces, I hope. And so let me just start at the top. Sorry, that's halfway down. Let me get to the top of this. So the way this is set up is, you know, here's the task kind of down the side here, and then essentially I'm looking forward, you know, last month was September, so I'm looking forward roughly a year or a little bit further than a year, just to get a sense of where we're at, where we're going, and that sort of thing. So next month is we do quarterly updates to the community. LAFCO requires them, others, we promise them, so next month is another district quarterly update. You'll see this in my presentation in a few minutes, but after our new board is seated, if that doesn't happen in December, I'll push this out. my plan is, for those who are familiar with how cities and some counties are run, the city manager often gives kind of a state of the city presentation. My plan is to do that for the district. I'll describe that more when I get to my presentation on item 7C this evening. Here's the 3 to 4, and hopefully you can see that number where it says 3 to 4. Planning on, outside of our normal meetings, 3 to 4 workshops for the community, and that would cover everything from all of the things that we've seen from a siting perspective, because we haven't selected a site. All the things we've looked at from a collection perspective, haven't decided on a collection. Treatment's the one that I think we're closest to some sort of a decision, although we haven't officially said we're going to do MBR. We've got 5 solutions from a effluent disposal perspective. We've got funding discussions, so try and craft those into about 3 or 4 workshops spread through the months of January and February. That will be the big time for public to come in, ask questions. We can talk about different issues, and that'll be the big input to the then seated board as they begin thinking about what sort of project description we're going to have. I noted EHS and State Water Board will be here in November. I'm going to track these so that we can just see when they happen. I suspect we'll want to have them back sometime in early 2023. Haven't really talked to them about that yet, but I suspect there'll be a time when we want them to come back. All right, so I'm going to scroll down and bring just the engineering design pieces to the top here for a minute. Stantec, when we originally were looking at solely collection from a gravity-fed perspective, the plan was 30% design, roll right into a 60% design on gravity-fed. Since we're not solely looking at gravity-fed, 60% design, which is a typical sort of an engineering approach, look at 30%, look at 60%, look at a final design, that is on hold at this point. Step design, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm still waiting for Closina and Renko to give me current sales kind of numbers. I did reach out to Stantec. If the board were to take this approach, we could get them to quickly do an engineering design as opposed to just a sales design on the step information we've seen thus far. I think what we've got now will be a comparison between sort of sales numbers on the step side of things and engineering numbers on the gravity-fed side. So if you want to get a little closer apples to apples, I can say that Stantec does have the bandwidth and would entertain some sort of a work order from us to be able to do that. I mentioned the effluent disposal options. This is predicated on us seating in the board in December, so hence they're continuing to look at them. I did have a brief conversation with Confluence the other day. They're on track, no issues that they're seeing there. Initial models, talked about that with my other report. We'll kind of get that to the full board in November. Now I want to be clear, you'll see now I'm talking about yet another assessment engineer report. The initial models are just that, they're just initial models. They look at things like parcel size and use of the parcel, that sort of stuff, but they don't really attempt to take any sort of, okay, what's the benefit of a sewer to that particular parcel or that class of parcels? So some might argue there's more benefit to a commercial zone parcel than there is to a residential zone parcel. That would be something you could consider as a benefit factor, and I put that term in quotes, but that would be a benefit factor. So the existing models don't allow for that, but NV5 can put together models that would allow us to do that. Once we've gone through and we get NV5, one of the things about an engineer's report and assessment, there's actually an engineer that has to stamp it and sign it officially. Once that's happened and in the lead up to that, we can begin talking about, exactly what property owners are going to have to pay. So remember, in January and February, we're going to be holding these workshops, is at least what I'm proposing here. There's a lot of things that would happen after that, okay? So that's what you're seeing, all these things that line up in March, kind of assume these are done. So we would then begin talking about siting options. We talk about a site acquisition plan as necessary. We would be forming an official final project description. We select a manufacturer and all the other things. What I'm not showing on here is some of the other construction activities would kick off, assuming we have a final project description. Things like put together a bid package for people to bid on, that sort of stuff. At that same time, while you'll see later tonight, we've got the initial contract for Padre, the proposed environmental services consultant. Once you've got your, assuming we have a final project description, things like put together a bid package for people to bid on, that sort of stuff. At that same time, while you'll see later tonight, we've got the initial contract for Padre, the proposed environmental services consultant. Once you've got your final project description, the official EIR or whatever environmental process we go through, the board will decide. I just listed it as an EIR because that's essentially what the proposal from Padre outlines the costs of, would start. And you'll notice I just show this not as individual blocks. It's a lengthy process with lots of public input. So I just wanted to make it clear that, given the spreadsheet that I'm showing, there's no easy way to do it, but that one right there is really tied to having a final project description, right? There are some preliminary things we can do to kind of prepare. There's forms that have to be filed, all that sort of stuff, but the real work would begin after a final project description is provided. Again, keep in mind this January, February timeline, right? And that March final project description, because the next few lines are going to talk about that a little more. So then we can get into some discussion about grants and financing. So as soon as we begin those workshops, I think that we'll begin to get enough information to be talking about a financing plan, and that would go through, for several months. We can start looking at construction grants and financing. It's not that we can't do that out here, but once we've got a project description, you can tie it a lot better to what you're going to do, and it'll help us focus a little more narrowly as opposed to just looking at anything and everything. In the meantime, we do have a grant from EHS, so we're continuing to monitor that and submit for reimbursement on that front. Our state WRFP grant, District Engineer Pike is working on the 50% report. Remember, that was a grant wherein we get half the money basically at the midway point once this report is filed, and then we get the rest of it after the work has been done. So we can file, the original document said we could file or would try and file in October. We'll probably be at November because I want the board to be able to review the report officially before we send it off. So I'm comfortable that we'll bring that as an item in November as well. And then just for tracking purposes, we originally said we would be done, and I think we'll probably be really close if we're not done by a year from now with the entire grant. Then I don't have a whole lot more under the 218 side of things, but here's discussion about, as I've been tracking it, the first well, there's a chance, as I found out, that we could begin as soon as November 8th, if we choose to move forward. And then sometime in the following month, we could get our first water sample from that well. Zoom screen. This is the same identical, not just same, but identical options chart that I showed last month. I don't have any new numbers in this side of things. I don't have any new data to fill anything in. But as has been requested, and I'm happy to do, I'm going to provide this in the packet each month. And I'll continue to bring it up. Even if nothing changes, I'll just bring it up again and say, look, this is where we're at. Nothing has changed. And I do expect that we'll see some new numbers, particularly on the MBR plant side of things, as it relates to a step MBR sort of a plant within, I think I mentioned, next week or so. So that's that one, Mr. President. That's my report on some things, and again, just part of that community education about where we're at and what we're up to.
Thank you, Mr. Savage. We'll take questions from the board. I wanted to start, if I could. I think you mentioned the step option, that we don't really have a comparison plan for step now after we've completed the gravity. How much money did we have left in the Stantec contract if we stopped at 30 and didn't go to 60?
Yeah, so within the 30%, so they didn't expend all the money for the 30% report. There's about $30,000 by my count.
Okay.
The amount that's shown in your budget documents today, there could be some trailing, project closeout sorts of things, but it's really close.
Okay, and did you talk to Stantec about their ability to evaluate a step system?
Yeah, they said they do have an engineer who's done a number of those,
Okay.
and he's available in November and December if the board
Okay.
chooses to go that direction.
Well, I'm in favor of having you come back for the board's consideration of using that money to further develop the STEP so that we can compare the true cost. I'm leery of costs from a sales side of it. I would like, and I don't know if you want to bring that back, I believe we looked at Stantec when we chose them, but we chose them for a different purpose, and so maybe we can have them just provide their experience in STEP, and if that's the case, we have, existing contract with them that could be amended. I can see the advantage of having Stantec do it because they've laid out the other system, and so they're familiar. They did the topography. They're familiar with everything. So I don't know if any other board members have comments on that, but I'd like to see you bring back a proposal within that money saved so that we can get a true comparison between the two.
I would endorse that.
Thank you, Director Nelson.
Yeah, I would too, and that was my number one takeaway from your comments. Guy, that was a great report, but we need to be able to compare apples to apples, gravity and STEP. And so just to clarify, you're saying in the 30% design budget, there's approximately 30,000 left? Or is that the delta between the 30% and the 60%?
Let me pull that up real quick. And I'll
Anyway,
accept it, yeah.
anyway, just if we have unused budget that we could allocate to a STEP engineering design that allows us to compare the two, I'd be in favor of that as well.
And I think what would be really important too is just with the Stantec plan, they developed it in a phased approach, and they had the cost as it goes along with the phased approach. And so, if we want to compare the two, that should be along the same line.
Okay.
So one question I had about the STEP system, I understand that it may or may not require replacement of septic tanks with other tanks. So if that is not, if we don't know the absolute answer to that, I think we need to get Stantec to look at both of those options.
If I recall right from the workshop that we had when they came in, that you have to replace with their, because they install a pump that is easily to replace if you have a failure of the pump, and it also has a reservoir in case the power goes out. So we'll ask Mr. Savage to confirm that, but my recollection when we had the workshop on the STEP is that you had to replace it with a new tank that has all the wiring for the pump and everything else.
So go ahead.
Well, yeah, going up and looking at the Arenco thing, they had the STEP system. I asked that question to the operator, the public works director at Coburn has a STEP system going into a major NBR treatment site. And I asked the Arenco people, and they said it can be done. They recommend against it simply on the long view. The short view is, yes, it's cheaper, you can do that, and you can connect up, but typically the septic tank has a life that's much, much shorter than the tank that Arenco brought that was out here, the round thing, and it lasts many, many years longer. And you would have to ultimately go to that anyway. So their input and what I took away from that was it can be done, but you're good. It's penny wise, pound foolish from the homeowner end. You'd be better off just to replace it with the new good one. Then everybody's on the same thing, and that was my takeaway from that.
Thank you, Director
Yeah, if I
Nelson.
could,
I would just note that the other element of this is that these are permitted facilities that require the state and EHS to, and they may or may not agree with leaving your existing tank in.
They won't. EHS will make you destroy the existing tank and fill it. They just will.
Yeah.
They're not going to allow it.
So, Mr.
But as
President.
you said, Director Nelson,
Yeah.
the right thing to do is to put in the new tank that allows you to get access to the pump, gives you a reservoir for power failure and all the,
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is your comments actually echo what they said to me, meaning, yes, you can, in very few cases, reuse the existing tank. They really do recommend that you replace them. And importantly, the sales numbers that we were given assumed they were all replaced. So,
But the issue here too is that most of the tanks in these systems that are having the major problems, their tanks need to be replaced anyways. There's no way they could survive going through a pressure system that just wouldn't work, so. Yeah. My only other comment I got for you, and maybe out of left field, maybe it's hopeful, but we do the ground monitoring well, come down, we do the sample, we found out that it's vastly different than it was in 1974, maybe to the good. What does that do to everything else? Does the county take that and say, oh, okay, well, maybe we aren't a special voluntary? Just by one test of one well that they say to put down, we put it down, they test the water, and it's not the issue that it was in 1974. Maybe it's greater, and there's more gonna be involved, but I keep being the optimist that maybe it isn't as bad, so. That could always be an issue too. That's my only comment.
any other questions from the board for Mr. Savage?
So we're not going to look at the option on the step system to keep the tank? I mean, I'm not saying I'm for it,
oh,
but I think our job is not to decide on everything, but to present the various options. Because I can envision someone saying, why can't we keep our tank because so-and-so did in some other town or whatever. And it's not going to be a lot of expense to look at that option because it's just a matter of the tanks, which now knows the cost, and what are the perils of doing it, if any. So I would like to see that option. Not
So-
that I'm for it, but I'm just saying we need to be positioned to answer questions so people understand what the options really are.
completely agree. Consistent with what we did with the 30% on gravity fed. I'm not sure you do that in the initial kind of design, much like we didn't address all of the drop. You know, they've made some assumptions in some places about gravity fed. I think for apples to apples 30% design, just assuming that you're going to replace them all is probably sufficient. When you get to a later design, much like we said with, you know, are there some areas we might have to get some easements, that sort of thing, then yeah, you could probably look at, you know, are there a couple of dozen that could be their existing tanks could be saved and reused, but it's down the road.
Well, Mr. Savage, maybe since we have EHS and the state coming next week when they give that presentation, we can ask them where they are. Because this is all permitted by them. It may not be our decision. Maybe it will be, but I've worked with them.
But just to
I also think addressing that in the workshop, and it's a sales job by us to the community that it can be done, but you're throwing good money after bad, and you'd be better off to do it the right way first time. It's like fixing anything. You can do a Band-Aid repair with super tape and baling wire, or you can do the right repair and get it done right and not waste money. So I think and EHS is going to probably support that, because if the system can do it, but it's not recommended, then that's not going to be high on the list for anybody, in my opinion. My 2 cents.
And the final 2 cents, hopefully, on this topic, but there's got to be technical requirements. They've got to know what systems are out there. It's like any technology, what systems are out there that are compatible, that we could do it with. And then EHS is going to know who has what systems. So maybe there's 8 advanced on-site systems that have been put in the last 5 years that we can reuse. I don't know. But we should at least know what the requirements are, and then we can go figure out like what quantity we're talking about. Because my guess is it's not that many, but we don't know. So.
Well, let's ask them.
Yeah.
They might be. They might have an opinion on if you don't replace with a new step system and you do not have a gravity drain field and you have a power failure, you're going to have sewage in your house because there's no other place for it to go, which is a health system. Okay, Mr. Savage, I think you know enough to bring something back to us. I hear the board generally interested in doing that, which will give us a good good path forward to be able to compare these different options.
Is November when you'd like to see that?
What works for you, Mr. If November, I think we might need information from EHS and the state before we actually do that. Do you see a problem coming back in November with that?
I was actually asking the question the other way. Would you rather see something sooner?
I think we need the state and EHS to weigh in on that before we do that. Otherwise, we're going to spend money without knowing what we're doing.
Yeah. But if I could offer, we need that if we're going to pursue it, we need it in time for the workshops at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
To do the apples to apples.
Yeah.
So we just need to find that out in short order.
How about this? How about if I'll get a hold of Stantec again, ask them how long they think, because they've got a lot of information, right, from the 30% gravity fed that they can reuse, I mean, streets and distances and all that sort of stuff. How long it'll take them to produce such a thing? I got the impression they didn't think it was that long in a preliminary conversation, but let me ask them.
Well, if you get this put together and you want to come back at a special meeting so that we can get it going, then that's what we'll do.
Thank you.
I would, if you could, at least maybe for Director Ross and myself, we reviewed their qualifications on the prior, but I did not review their qualifications on a step. So maybe you could ask them to get that and send that out quickly, and then the whole board can see that then too. When that item comes back.
Got it.
I just don't know, so that's what I think. Does that conclude yours, Mr. Savage? Okay, so then Mr. Pike, did you have anything, District Engineer?
The Manager Savage just mentioned that I'm working on that water recycling report, so the first installment payment from the state grant, and hope to have a draft of that out in a week or so, week or two. And just so you know what it is and it isn't, that money is coming based on the fact that we look at the options to recycle water, which is a little bit different than some other processes. So the effluent's a higher quality. It doesn't mean we have to do those options, because at the end of the day, it's a feasibility study, and the district still decides the options. So I'll qualify everything in the front end of the report, but there may be some people that see that report and think that it's defining a very specific, narrow option. It's not. It's really just defining what it takes to get to recycled water and if it's feasible.
All right, thank you. All right, so then we will move on to item 6, the administrative agenda, and item 6A is approval of the minutes from our September 14th meeting. I was absent.
I'll move that we approve item 6A, the September 14 meeting minutes.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second.
Public comment, sir?
I do not see public comment on 6A. Do you have any?
No, I just, Anna Marie's hand is up. I'm not sure if she's looking to talk on this one or her hand's still up. Okay.
Okay, well, hearing none. Then all in favor of the motion and the second, say aye.
Aye.
And I will abstain. Passes 4-0-1. Item 6B is review and approve payment of invoices received by September 30th, 2022. Sir Savage, do you have any comment on these items?
Just that, as noted in the agenda, normally the invoices are reviewed by the Finance Committee before I even put them on the agenda. Given the timing of the 2 meetings this time around, they were not approved for recommendation by that committee before I put the agenda out. They have since been reviewed by the Finance Committee, and they are recommending them to your board. Also at the Finance Committee, we did take up the question assigned last month about legal counsel bills, and the committee decided to essentially keep current practice.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. We have at least one public comment on 6B, which is Captain Rohr.
Yeah, I want to actually speak to the legal bills, and I'm going to recommend really strongly to the board, although I know I'm not your favorite person and you don't love my advice, but I want you to really consider that it is not appropriate to approve the enclosed bill for legal services. There's no description of the work performed. District Council's contract with the CSD requires that he provide a description of the work performed, and it's not provided here. It's not in any publicly available records. The Finance Committee is not District Council's client. The CSD is the client. That means the whole board can see the bills before they're approved for payment. Additionally, the bills are public records. That's right, you're a public agency, and you're supposed to be working and spending money on the public's behalf. That's us. And that's why the law makes sure that the public has access to those records. With very few, very narrow exceptions, and I know District Council is aware of them, legal bills to public agencies are not subject to attorney-client privilege. And you know that. You know how I know? Because the CSD always made that information available. You included the full bills in every single agenda packet for years. Puzzled by their disappearance, I went back through your agenda packets, and I found out when District Council's bills stopped being shared with the public. Anybody want to guess when that happened? Director Palmer, do you want to guess? That's right, it's when you were serving as president of the board. Under your leadership, information about the legal services being provided to the CSD were removed from agenda packets. They were removed from the public record. So when Mr. Savage tells me that he was directed, quotes, to omit the billing information from agenda packets, I draw a pretty reasonable inference that either you, Lisa, told him to do that, or District Council told him to do that. Either way, it was not good counsel. There is no threat of litigation here. People are allowed to ask for access to public records. That's the whole point. That's why we have a Public Records Act request. You're now wasting, yet again, more time and more taxpayer money by withholding public records. I think you need to turn them over, you need to share them with the entire board, and you need to share them with the people who are actually funding these legal services.
Thank you. Mr. Savage, are there any other requests to speak on item 6B?
I'm going to assume that Anne Marie's hand is just still up.
With that, then, I'll entertain a motion for item 6B.
I move that we approve these voices as shown in 6B.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Director Army. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? With one abstention. 4-0-1. Thank you. We'll now go on to item 7. 7A is consideration of a contract with Padre and Associates for environmental services. Mr. Savage.
Thank you, Mr. President. So as it says here, this is consideration of a contract with Padre and Associates for environmental services. Note that we had a subcommittee that was kicked off back in May. It met a couple of times, reviewed responses from Padre, Stantec, and Rincon. Unanimously, that ad hoc committee, which was myself, President Fayram, and Vice President Ross, agreed that Padre by far provided the best information. We then took a little bit of a sidebar. Well, other things got busy. I set this aside a little bit. Padre's primary contact for us was on leave, so was not able to work on the contract. Was finally able to get back to it this last month. Much of what is included in the document, I think the best way to view it is, it's more like a time and materials, meaning we're going to give them work orders, and they're going to work according to an hourly rate, and the hourly rates are included in the contract as is provided. As part of the scope, they did include kind of, here's what an EIR would cost, which is how they came up with the $109,000. There are still some remnants from early conversations. Remember, this was, if you go back to May, we were just beginning to look at some of these other alternatives. So you will see some things in there like about the outfall of the creek with effluent disposal. Clearly no decisions have been made on that. And Padre recognizes that the work they do for an EIR will be tied to the project description that we give them. And so while those comments are in there, they're really just, I think, more for kind of background and understanding of what we're going to be asking them to do eventually. So with that, we do have $50,000 in this year's budget. As you noted earlier, if you saw it, I don't anticipate that the bulk of the work will really happen until next fiscal year, right? We're going to get the project description, if that timeline holds true, in about March. And they wouldn't work $50,000 worth between March, April, May, and June. So I think we're within budget from that perspective, but there will be an expectation that we'll be spending more on environmental once we've got a project plan. Yeah, so that's it.
So by approving this, we are not, is your intention then that we would move ahead with doing some work, or wait until the, you know, that we actually have selected a project and go forward? Because I'm part of selecting Padre. They're very capable, but I certainly don't think we would want to spend any money at this time until we actually narrow down what we're going to do.
So my assumption is that I will keep their project manager up to date with where we're at. You know, just the regular phone call to say, okay, this is where we're at, Matt. As we get toward those workshops, your board may decide, you know, let's have them attend the workshops or do some of this other stuff so they can begin building some background on a potential project. Alternatively, your board could say no, wait till we've got a project description. As I mentioned earlier, there are some initial forms and that sort of stuff, kind of mostly administrative work, if nothing else, could begin beforehand. Really the intent to me of bringing this, first of all, we can get some closure around having an environmental consultant on board, and it won't be a scramble when we do get to a project, right? We'll have already taken care of it, they'll be on board, and once your board says, okay, here's a work package we want them to work on, we can get them started.
Questions from the board?
How long, if we didn't sign this tonight, and we went to the workshops, and we did want their input there, particularly surrounding site selection or something like that, would we then need to sign the contract and bring them in that way, or is that just some consultation that would be handled separately? And the second question part of this is this, I don't know, I read this and it seems to be directed to the gravity flow system and not the step system, which we still haven't even really looked at. I'd rather either have them provide a attachment B, which includes what they'd be doing in that system, so that you've got both of them ready to go depending on what the final choice is. If I'm making myself understood.
So let me try those in order.
Yeah.
So the question about timing. There is no particular harm if you said, bring this back next month. If we get to January, I think we're going to be scrambling on a bunch of other things, and you're going to wish you'd done it already. That's one person's opinion. So
I kind of see a value in them at the workshops, so that we don't go off
right
somewhere and not have the right direction.
Right.
I hate to spend a lot of time on something that's a no-go.
So, nobody's alarmed. Does that answer the question around time? So,
I think it does.
Okay, yeah, because if we had them come in for the workshops, they would just be billing us an hourly rate to be at them, right?
That satisfies my concern.
And then the other one was about,
the tailoring of the
first step.
Yeah.
Yeah. So could certainly have them do that. Again, you know, there's nothing drop dead. Got to sign it tonight. Any pressure like that? I've been trying to keep these things moving. It was time. I got it here.
I personally think it'd be beneficial to have them participate in some of the workshop part. I don't know, in having, I mean, that'll help them and help us. I don't know whether having a contract at this point is necessary, but at the same time, if it's not time sensitive, but we don't want to drag it out either. I think we can deal with it. I think that's a manageable choice myself. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Any other comments from the board before I go to public
Yeah,
comment?
go ahead.
No, I have a couple. First of all, we asked you to bring this, so thank you, because the whole idea was to get an environmental consultant identified now, so that once we go through the workshop process, we have somebody ready to go. Having said that, I too am a little concerned about the presupposition that it's a gravity system, right? As opposed to just generally discussing a project. It's just a little far ahead, gets too far ahead of where we are at this time for me. And I also think, while I appreciate and I can give you my specific comments, the $110,000 for a full EIR, it seems like we could get a better sense, and for budgeting purpose of it, how they would phase it. Like by a draft EIR, the community workshops to a draft EIR is estimated to be X amount. And then lastly, we talked about whether or not there was an initial report or some document short of a full draft EIR that allows us to get in the funding application game. So I guess that's a question, or do we have to have a draft EIR before we can apply for funding? Anyway, so those are my general comments. I think we need to have it ready to go, but I wouldn't, not in favor of signing this today, approving it. And I do know Padre. I think it's a great selection. I've worked with them in the past, so fine with the vendor, and I appreciate the technical committee's review of everyone. So anyway, those are my comments.
Director Ross?
So just to make sure that we understand what this is, my understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is an agreement that we may want to have them do some work for us. And if we decide we don't want them to do anything, they don't do any work at all. But we give them authorization as tasks come up, whether it be for STEP or anything else, and that's how they get their money. But this is not authorizing any spending at all. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So I say let's get it going, and then we can decide later how much money and what they're doing.
We have one public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the board. So Michelle, the word.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. And by the way, with regards to Brown Act, I'm an elected official as well. Any member of the public can comment on a discussion item, any item that's on the agenda. It doesn't have to be an action agenda item. I am in favor with Lisa to delay this contract for $109,000. I think that, first of all, it was a contract that was brought to the board by an ad hoc committee. And I feel that there hasn't been a lot of transparency. There's a lot of information that has been not shared with the general public. And I'm feeling that things are getting hidden, and I don't know why, and I don't understand it. I don't understand why we changed the project. There's been no response to why we have a resolution. What's the purpose of a resolution if you're not going to follow the resolution? And you changed the project along the way, and especially it was during COVID, and no hearings and no announcements, nothing in the paper that said the project changed. So this agreement is alarming to me because it seems like it's the cart before the horse, and especially because it's tailored for a gravity system. This is telling me that you're going full bore ahead. If I was just a member and I didn't hear any of the other discussions. So I'd recommend that the board delay this and have and also who were the competitors? Stantec was one of them. Because this was an ad hoc committee, there was no public agendas. And I would like to see the other contracts. I think that should all be up on your website. You should put as much information as you can on your website. I'd like to see these other contracts. What were the bids? What were the proposals? Was this the highest bidder? Was this the middle? Or was this the low? And that wasn't discussed in this section of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to move forward with.
Well, I had submitted before that.
Oh, you have 7B.
Yeah.
guy I was on. Mark just handed one in.
Oh, Mark.
He didn't put a number on it.
7A.
Oh,
7A, no, I'm sorry, I
Michelle
submitted
was
7A as well then.
Okay, you wrote down
I meant
7B, but
No, I'm
that's
sorry,
fine.
I'm
I'll
so
correct that
wrong.
for you. We'll go to Mr. Hertel.
Use on this time. So. I would just kind of encourage, I think, Tom, you said at one time, the best way to slow down the project is to try to go too fast. And the environmental, I think, I'm glad to hear you guys are going to take a closer look at STEP, because there's about a $10 million delta on the collection, at least according to these rough numbers. And I think you need to dig in there and see, is it really that, or is it more or less? And then I do think the environmental and getting that going without having a better idea of the project, I think is a little bit of the cart before the horse, and you get all these things going. You're not a real big district, guy. You can only do so many things. So I kind of think, wait on that. And then secondary, just if anybody wants to go visit that town in Oregon that's on step system, some of you guys went. I passed the information over to Tom. They were very generous. It was a town of 1,500 people, and the whole city staff basically rolled out the red carpet to Los Olivos and showed us their treatment plan and showed us the step thing. It was pretty interesting to see in real life, the pluses and minuses. I've got a video that's being edited. I'll get it to you. It's very rough, but at least it'll give you kind of an idea. So that'd be my thought. And then also just, with all this environmental and everything, just keep it in mind that these advanced treatment site systems are going in every day. Today, a $100,000 one went in at the new building next to my office that Mr. Lash put in, and there's more and more going in. So I just think, keeping in mind, how do we be a good neighbor to those folks when we do have a community system? Can they tie their advanced treatment into a step, and they don't have to abandon a $100,000 investment? I think it's a very real thing to look at, because there'll be 100 of them by the time we have a treatment plan. And then the one other thing, technology-wise, as you're type of environmental, I'd recommend looking at that MBBR system that Orenco has. It can do a lot more treatment than some of their other systems, and it's all in the ground. I'm not an expert in technology, but I think it's worth kind of looking at all the options, and that's where the creativity comes in mind. And like, if you think of construction, there's design, architecture, and there's engineering. You got usually design, architecture. Design comes before engineering for really good reasons. So just kind of that creativity part of making sure we're kind of looking at those options before we're full speed ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. And I believe our final speaker is Mr. Roy.
Hey, just a couple of quick things. So first, I think this contract is not what Commissioner Ross was thinking it is, or Commissioner Nelson was hoping it is. It's not a contract that says, oh, we're going to help out by the hour to help you determine where the site goes, right? It's very specific. It says we're going to study one site with one system. We'll do an alternative. And when they do these alternatives in EIRs, right, the alternative is a thing they cook up and they compare against it and say, oh, we could do that, but that wouldn't get us to our goals. So it's essentially for one site, what it appears to be the Little Creek site. It appears to be with the dumping it into the ground with the alternative of going into the creek. So you don't want to sign it for that reason. Beyond that, you also need to review the contracts. And we all make mistakes. Like I wrote 7B when I meant 7A, and it's easy to do. But just looking at the contract really quickly, I saw really obvious stuff that you wouldn't want to sign with. So for example, there's a part where you guys limit the liability to the contractor, right? You say, contractor, you're never going to have to pay more than $50,000 or the contract amount, which is $106,000. That's the most you're ever going to pay. Now down below, you have insurance requirements. Those insurance requirements say they're going to be insured for $1 million. Whether or not $1 million is enough, I don't know that it is, but let's assume it is. You would want to be able to collect that whole amount. You wouldn't limit it on the $106,000. And when you push back, they're not going to object, because you're going to say, your counsel is going to say to them, look, it's, or Mr. Savage, you're going to say to them, look, you're already paying for the insurance, we just want the benefit of it. Everyone's going to do it. Those are little things, but it goes to instilling a sense of confidence in the population that you guys are doing this in a competent manner. Because you wouldn't want to leave, about $900,000 on the indemnity table that you could otherwise have. So two things. One, read the contracts before you put them up. Two, you don't want to sign this contract now, although you might want to bring somebody on board, you would want to bring them on strictly, I think, on an hourly basis right now, without saying what you're bringing them on for. So I would suggest revising it, and if you want to bring them on to consult, do it, and do it on an hour, not on this format, which I think, hearing from some of the directors, is probably a direction you might want to go. And I want to compliment District Council for the mustache and beard. I think he's either going to become a fireman or a hipster. And I want pictures when he becomes either one. Thank you.
Just going to limit your comments to the item and not any.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm sorry. I apologize, sir.
We'll bring it back to the board. I think I'm in favor of having this come back as well, and maybe with a two-stage. I understand getting some initial work which is done can be done regardless of what is done. I think we need that done clear. I'm not so sure that they need to attend the meeting. They might attend the Zoom, but having them come and incur those costs, I don't know if that's something that they would. I don't know if that's something they would charge us for, or whether that's something that it will be done. But I really think before we really get going, we have to have what the project is, and I think we have some revisions to do here. So I'm in favor of this coming back with more in alignment of the timing. We're not going to start doing our environmental review right now. We don't have a project, so I'm in favor of this coming back as well.
Would you like a motion?
So I'll entertain a motion.
So I'll make a motion that we table this item to a further date.
So if I may, Mr. President, I can take general direction as well. You don't necessarily need a motion to just consider the board's comments and the public comment and bring it back November. Is that correct, Council?
There's a motion on the table.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
I did not hear a specified time to bring it back, so there's your discretion, Mr. Savage. So I'd entertain a second for the motion.
A second.
Seconded by Director Harmon. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? 5. And thank you for your diligence in bringing this back, Mr. Savage. We do appreciate that. Item 7B is consideration of a contract with BC2 for groundwater monitoring well drilling services. Mr. Savage.
Okay. All right. So this is a separate contract, and as you'll see, there's not a contract specifically attached to this. I did not have time to obtain from BC2 a separate contract, and some language about making sure that it's approved by District Council. The rush on this one was I knew they might be able to actually drill a well in November, and there's been a lot of focus on that. So this is, you can see the quote that they provided. It's a couple of $100 more because it includes some slightly more appropriate tasks than the two that I had mentioned last month. So this is a quote essentially for $23,715 from BC2 to do the actual well drilling. And as I think I mentioned earlier, they are available November 8th to get started if the board approves this tonight. If not, come back. There is, one last thing. There's $50,000 set aside in the current budget to do this. One of the questions that we've often asked is, given if this first one is $23,715, the second one could probably be done if you do it at the same time for a little bit less, because some of those costs are just mobilization from Orange County. So if the board decided to try and do two, I think we could fit it within the budget, and they could probably still start November 8th.
Do you have a second site that we could easily and quickly do that?
There are a number of sites that are identified. There's been discussion about another site since presumably the flow, this is what we're going to check, right, is flowing from north to south. There's another site on the, I'll call it the western part of our district that's in the groundwater management plan. Okay. Would be a reasonable one.
Are those, if I could, are those identified in the monitoring program we put together? So that would be the next, it would be the next priority.
Somewhere in that. I don't know that it was prioritized, District Engineer Doug. Was that list prioritized or just listed as 14, 15 sites?
There was a suggestion of prioritization to have the ones on the northerly end of the district first, because that would not only show potential contamination in the groundwater under our district, but flowing in from outside the district.
Hence the thought that one on that one's kind of center east, right, of the district, that getting one center to west.
Okay.
Are these the same test sites that the county used
They only did one.
in '74? They only did one?
One hole.
So this is all off one drilling in 1974? And where was that? You know?
I don't know if that was one hole or not.
Was it?
I believe there was
I
more,
would
because,
think-
you know who would know that would be prior director O'Neill, because he was
Yeah.
very involved in that. He could-
It would seem like it'd be nice to go at least within the same area of those test wells to know whether we're really looking at the same thing or not.
Well, one of the issues is we have to do it on a piece of ground that we have permission to do that, and we have this in road right of way, so we were able to do that. Mr. Savage, I believe you told me that one benefit too is that the county has agreed to pull the samples and do the testing for us.
That's correct.
So that's advantageous, that we don't have to incur that, as long as they're willing to do that. But that's great. Do you believe they would test 2 wells? I would think that the time to do, if they were in proximity, they would do that.
I do believe that, yes.
Is that the county's participation in the well water sampling? I know there's allegedly a partnership there. Is that their part of the partnership? I don't know. I'm just.
No, I believe it was the county water agency measures wells, and I believe Mr. Savage reached out to the manager of that and asked that they would kindly grab these while they're doing that, and they indicated that they would support us with that.
I seem to recall seeing something back in the early documents that EHS for the county was going to help with the cost.
Our last
or something.
discussion was that they have no interest or ability to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, which is unfortunate.
Are they the ones that did them in '74?
I don't know. Well, let's go to public comment. We have one request to speak, Mr. Rohr. Oops, I'm sorry, we got 2. We'll start with Mr. Rohr.
Sorry, I got confused before. Just quick questions, and first a comment. I think if Mr. Herthel is still here, he may know more. From memory, I think there were 6 wells that were drilled, one of which was over the standard. And you're nodding, and
It's over. Right?
you know, I mean, obviously somebody should check, but I think there were like 6, and there was one that was high. And what's interesting is, right, the standard that we've been given by the regulators, right, it's a performance standard. It's not a requirement of how we do it, right? The requirement was, look, you've got this one well that's too high. You need to get down so that no wells are too high. So unless they're going to change the requirements for you, I don't think they're telling you, at least they weren't then, when the district was established, they weren't saying how to get there, they were just saying you have to get there. So that is a logic in going back and, you know, I'm forgetting which commissioner said what, but this goes to what you guys were saying, is you may want to test like where that test came up before, for example, because, and right, that goes to the previous comment, who knows what you find there. If, for example, it's twice as bad as it was, that's one thing. If it's not over the standard, that would be something else.
Yeah.
So that may be something that you want to consider with regards to the wells. And I think, oh yeah, the contract, you might want to see the contract, but you can delegate authority, I think, too. But this is really the main point. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rohr. Mr. Herthel.
Yeah, fully support the groundwater monitoring. I think, you know, you can't manage it, or you can't measure, you can't manage it, right? The location up by the highway, I do know there are some neighbors that live over there. They live there for a very long time, and I'm not sure it's the cleanest part of town. There may have been some water testing done there years ago, and I can't remember. So I think having multiple data points might be good. My old company, I used to test water and stuff every day, and the quality people used to drill into me like the importance of multiple data points and so forth. So if you needed another location downtown, the Lavinia Campbell Park, you could drill a well in the far back corner there if that was a good location or not. I'm just offering that up. But I definitely would support a few data points.
Thank you, Mr. Bell.
And back there may give you a scary number that, but it's all in panic.
Bring it back to the board and comments. I just would say, I think, well, I'm frustrated that we can only find a driller from Orange County. I've vented that frustration with Mr. Savage enough, and apparently we can't get anybody else that will do it. So if that's the case and we have them coming up, then I think having the second well put in and taking advantage of that makes a lot of sense, and having more data. So if we can fit that in within our existing budget, then I would be supportive of that.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this versus the first one that came around, GSI did out, this is substantially better. I think GSI was somewhere in the terms of $2,500 a foot, vertical foot. I'm like, what? This is more recent, probably closer to the $200 range of vertical foot. They're going to go 150 feet. Makes more sense, and I do concur. And Mr. Savage, you may want to just tell them we are going to do 2 on the same visit and get a rough estimate for the second site, since they've got a few $1,000s in mob, they've got some per diems, they've got some other stuff in here, and they're only talking about drilling for 2 days and 1 day duration for the development rig. So I think that they could definitely facilitate getting the second one done, and it should be, in my view, it shouldn't be any more than another $10,000 or whatever. I think for 35, you should be able to get both of those done. But that's just my gut.
You've got a bid from Director Army. So.
I can't do that.
Director Nelson.
I would concur with Mr. Rathel on the fact that the more the merrier. If you can get a bulk rate, why not get as many as we can get? Say, even 3 if you're talking. I mean, if you can negotiate it within the amount of money we've got budgeted for it.
Well, the issue that they're going to have, Tom, is that they everything depends on the soil.
Yeah.
If the soil is really hard and they hit a rock pan or whatever, and it's going to take them. I mean, then the cost just go up. So hopefully that the soil in the areas where they drill is not too dense, and they can drill through it with what they're trying to do. That's the only unknown when you get into that stuff. So
probably find that out in the first hole.
Exactly. And so that's what I'm saying. If they put the first hole down, relatively quickly, then there should be they just don't move it to another site and just keep going. So. Yeah.
I'm liking what I'm hearing and agree that we should move forward. And if they're here, I mean, if however many wells we can get for $50,000, we should drill and have them prioritized. I do have a question on the GSI oversight. Is that within the 50,000, or is that a different bucket that that's part of GSI scope that's allocated elsewhere? That makes sense.
Yes, makes perfect sense. I've been viewing it as within that 50,000.
Okay. And what is their share of that? That's not incorporated into the 23, right?
Correct.
Okay.
There's
that
this project management fee over the top.
Is it a couple $1,000? Is it
things like that?
Okay.
Do we know what
it's not tens of thousands of dollars.
Okay.
Already 23. All right. Well, with that, I'd entertain a motion if.
I have a comment.
Well, Director Ross.
So in the LAMP report the county put out in 2014, it references nitrate samples, nitrate data for ID number 1, wells 5 and 7, which kind of bracket Los Olivos, and it's basically almost 5 times lower than the limit. So my question is, can we try to get data from those wells and do we know the wells that we drill, are they compatible in terms of depth? So that we can do a comparison?
So if we only had the general manager of ID1 in the room, oh, we do, he's in the back. I'll take a stab at your question, Director Ross, and then Peter, if you wouldn't mind. The question was the nitrate levels, and where is 5 and 7 for the benefit of some of us who don't know?
5 is right around the corner here, and 7 is across 154.
Across 154, okay. And those wells are going to be on the order of 1,000 feet deep? More or less?
As a general rule of thumb, we don't like to get into specifics about, the water supply infrastructure, but I think it's safe.
It's not 100 feet?
They're both well over 1,000.
Yeah, okay. So there, and I believe we talked about this briefly at a prior meeting too, is that, we've got two, groundwater zones that the area concern is the shallow groundwater, which is most influenced by, on-site waste treatment systems. And then the deep wells typically have less of an influence from that. So that's why those numbers, I think, are different. As for testing, do you do regular tests on those wells?
We do.
Yeah.
I mean, per state requirements.
Yeah, and you're meeting state requirements, so
Absolutely.
I think that answers, does that answer your question? Maybe I didn't.
Well, I'm just
Yeah.
looking for inexpensive data, so if there's ways we can.
I don't think it's apples to apples, because when they're down 1,000 feet and we're at 100, which is where, they're looking at it, then that's where I think we have to take that, so.
I know I didn't put in a question, but can you just entertain the notion, is it possible to test from existing, we have a lot of ag wells about the depth that you're talking about drilling, would it be, I'm just throwing out
Okay, thank you.
wondering whether
Thank you.
you could test those.
We also talked about finding, Director O'Neill at the time was trying to locate if they could find any of the prior wells, and I don't believe he was successful. Do you remember, Director Palmer? I know he was looking at that, and I think they were
The previous.
yeah, they were in odd locations, and they're probably there and covered, so we can't. So I think what we can do here today is put these 2 wells in as a start. I know our hope was we would have a lot more, and the county would help us a lot more with that. That doesn't look like it's going to happen. I guess just one last question that I have for council. We're agendized for this well. If we add a second well, but we stay within our budget, are we okay to do that, or would that need?
We can include that in the terms, but what I'm hearing is that the amount not to exceed as recommended may not be the amount that we can secure. And the board needs to be clear, because it's correct to say you can delegate authority, but you need to be specific in the authority that you're delegating to us, because you don't have a contract for you. So one option is we can work with them and develop a contract and bring it back, and the board can approve that at a regular meeting or a special meeting. Or you can give us specific direction on the number of wells and the amount not to exceed.
Okay. So if a motion were made to do up to 2 wells, or to do 2 wells for less than the existing 50,000, that would give you the authority.
You need to specify an amount not to exceed.
Not to exceed the 50,000.
That would be
Okay.
the direction.
All right. Thank you for that.
Since that question was sort of offered from the floor, would ag wells provide the proper testing results? I mean, can those be used? I don't know. How about you? What do you think, Director Army? I mean, is that something that's been done, can be done? Is there rules against it? Does it provide conflict of other things? I don't know. I'm searching for answers, because if we can get more and it's there, why spend a whole lot?
I think at this point we don't. I don't know what wells are out there. I don't know what depths they're at. If we can grab additional data from other wells, that's and it's comparable to what we're trying to target, then I don't think we're limited on doing that.
More the merrier.
It seems to me that if that were feasible, Director O'Neill spent a lot of time on this. He was highly interested in getting this monitoring data, and so having that not in front of us leads me to believe there were issues. But I think we could certainly look at that, and maybe even the individuals from the county would have information, because they do measure, for other reasons, but they do measure private wells with their permission, recognizing that you only have that while you have the permission. And so, but I'm in favor of moving forward with the 2 wells that would be ours, and then we would have a solid, reliable group of wells we could collect from.
I'd be willing to make that motion that we provide, have them drilled to with a cost not to exceed $50,000.
But to be clear, we have to come back with a contract, and it's going to be for more than 50,000. It's over what?
Right now, what I'm hearing from Director Nelson is a delegation of authority for us to get that contract, and you're also authorizing the general manager to execute. If you want it to come back, then I think the motion should state that.
Just a point of clarification, and not to disturb the motion, but don't we have a maximum that he has authority to execute? And above that, it has to come back to the board?
Well, this is the specific delegation.
Okay.
Without any
coming back to the board. Okay, just being clear.
Yep.
I'm willing to amend it to make it legal and proper.
So just to make sure that it's clear, the motion on the table is to authorize the general manager to execute a contract pending review by district council in an amount not to exceed $50,000 for the drilling of 2 wells by BC2.
That's my.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
I'm sorry, who's that? Thank you. Okay.
So motion by Director Nelson, second by Director Army. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Passes 5-0. Thank you. And we'll move to item 7C, which is the General Manager's 6-month report.
Okay, I'm going to put up a presentation here. Give me a second. So when I was hired to be your contract general manager, a lot of the discussion was about what was occurring at the time and what would be different when you hired me. And one of the things that I mentioned then was I would pay very close attention during my first couple of months and see what lessons I could learn during that 6 months and share them with the board, just as my kind of reflections of the view from the general manager's seat. So this very brief presentation hits the highlights, I think, of the key items that I've noticed. And I thought I'd just take a few minutes to share those items with you and take questions from your board afterward. All right, so as I kind of started off by mentioning the fact that I'm a contract general manager. I was contracted to work 30 hours a month. The board president can't approve additional hours. When I got hired and mentioned the first time I came into the room here to talk about this particular role, I said, I'm happy to give the district a few hours every month. Hopefully it's working for everyone else. I'm fine with the way this is going on, but I have been tracking all of my hours just in case it's somebody who's not me, right? And you had to hire someone else. I don't plan on leaving unless you guys fire me anytime soon. But if you had to hire someone else, you just need to know that it's not really the way I've been executing it, a 30-hour-a-month role. It could be 60 or 80 pretty easily. Let me be clear about that. For instance, we just had a long conversation about the environmental services contract. Because I was busy on other things, I set that aside. Had I had 60 hours a month, that would have been back to you in May or June. But I kind of try and work with the president to make sure my priorities are correct. And so that's why it came when it did. So on average, the hours I have tracked come out to 42.6 a month. And there are a couple of months where I did request to go over my 30-hour limit because there were hours or months that were closer to 50 hours, and received approval accordingly. And so I billed an average during the first 6 months of 34.2 hours. I looked at those hours. I keep a log of everything I'm doing, and I looked at those hours and kind of broke them down into 4 major categories. Kind of the general administration of things, project work, meaning when I'm actually working on projects and having meetings, business meetings like these, or the various finance and other subcommittee meetings, and then last but not least, the budget, because I think that's one of the things you've tasked me to do is help manage the budget, so I think it's appropriate to call that out. So, coincidences sometimes you scratch your head at, but when I did the tally, and the way I did this was I took each month and I just categorized things without even looking at the numbers. When I ran the summary, these first 2 came out identical to the quarter hour. So 74.75 or 73.4 hours were spent on general administration, and the same number of hours were spent on project work. And just so it's clear here, this is obviously all the hours, not just the 30-hour a month window, right? This is all of the hours that I booked. Business meetings like this one took up the majority of my time as far as single activities are concerned, nearly 90 hours of that. Keep in mind that there's an hour to set up the room, and there's time after everybody leaves. There's putting together the agendas, getting them mailed out, posting them at the post office, attending the meeting, doing the minutes, making sure the video's up, and all the things that go along with that, writing the minutes. So not surprising that is the biggest chunk of time, because it's part of the administration of a district like this. And then last but most certainly not least, 16 3/4 hours, or about 7% of my time spent working specifically on the budget, meaning putting it together, bringing it to the meetings, that sort of stuff. Time I spend reviewing bills and things like that are either included in business meetings, because it's often in prep for the finance meeting, or if it's just paying bills, that's in general administration. Okay, so here's, I always like to start with good news. I think there are a number of things that are working well. I think the board relations, under category of board relations, one of the things that's now working well, when I came on board, finance meetings were kind of an ad hoc schedule, even though it was a standing meeting. We've got regularly scheduled meetings and times. Yes, we've shifted the time around a little bit, and one time we had to shift the date, but for the most part, they're now regularly scheduled. People know when they're going to happen, and I just think the regularity of that, much like our Wednesday evening meetings here, just makes it easier for everybody, right? Because you know what to expect, when to expect it, and you can get it on your calendars and so on. I think from an operations perspective, the ad hoc meetings are working well. We had one for the environmental services contract. I've met occasionally with the project management ad hoc committee. We've got a technical committee that's met a couple of times. I've noted to President Fayram that I think as we get closer to these workshops and we begin talking about specific topics, siding maybe as an example, you might want to have a siding ad hoc committee, right, that spends time talking about that, because if you try and do that all at once, every board meeting is going to be 8-10 hours long, and we'll never get through them. So you might consider some more ad hoc committees. Those are like any other meeting, they're open to the public. So happy to particularly the standing one with the finance. We do them just across the hall here. Happy to have people attend those, so on and so forth. Also working well in my book is the relationship with M&S now. I think it's now back to its originally intended purposes. Mr. Pike is our district engineer. He's back to doing engineering only. He's not worried about the meeting here. He's not worried about paying bills. He's not worried about project management. He gets to focus on what he does best, engineering. Also with M&S, Mary Zepeda. Yeah, Zepeda does our actual paying of the bills. We use a county system called Fin, and it's fairly antiquated. Think green screen of the 1970s. It's not that bad, but it can be tricky to get into, tricky to pay bills. She's very adept at it. She keeps me on track as far as, hey guys, this bill approved, this one pay. We have a very good relationship. I think that's working exceptionally well. So part of what I'm saying in this is I wouldn't recommend any changes to the relationship with M&S. Mary works really well. Doug in his engineering role is working really well. And I think part of what you see when you look at this is, if you look at the M&S bills, since I've come on board, you've watched them decline dramatically because Doug's only doing engineering now, and we're not using other M&S resources to do other things. I'm doing a lot of that work directly. So 2 areas that I identified that I think I would put in the category of need some fine tuning. I don't want to say they're not working, but I think they could use some fine tuning. There's still some things around meeting agendas and workshops I think could use some fine tuning, and then public outreach and communications. So let's take the meetings and agendas and workshop first. I think the rhythms of the meetings are settling down a little bit. In looking at the time period prior to my coming on board, there are a lot of last minute meetings, a lot of special meetings. I've set up some deadlines as far as, look, if I don't have something by September 30th, it's not going to go on the agenda for October. Often people were scrambling a little bit to try and jam something into an agenda last minute. I think it just helps us meet timing for getting information out to the public a little better. So it's always my goal, for instance, with our Wednesday meetings, I try and publish the agenda, even though it's not required. I try and publish it by Friday afternoon. That way if somebody's at home over the weekend, they can look at it. They still have Monday, Tuesday, and up to the meeting time on Wednesday to look at it. So I think that rhythm, as far as what I've got going, is working pretty well. We still have the occasional need for special meetings. Fine, not a problem, but I think there's probably some little tweaks that we're going to have to do there. I will note, because it just came to me, the church is looking at their future calendar, and one of the questions they asked me was, this was just yesterday, would it be possible for us to move our meeting? And I suggested to them no, that our meetings have essentially always been on the second Wednesday, well, the first Wednesday after the second Tuesday of the month, but the second Wednesday of the month, and that if they have needs for this room on the second Wednesday of the month, we'd probably be better served to find a different location as opposed to trying to change that up. That's my opinion. That's how I responded to them. If your board feels differently, please, during the public or during your director's comments, ask me. We could talk some more about that. I do continue to tweak the agendas ever so slightly. What appears at the top of the agenda is a little different sometimes. I've been finding as I print these out for signature and other things, there's still some little tweaks going on like that. By and large, the core of the meeting agenda is not changing. Trying to get it to settle down, but they still, again, this is why I say it needs a little fine tuning. If there's things that your board believes should be on the agenda, the paper agenda, not topics for the agenda, but in that general format, please let me know. I tend to talk, I think, sufficiently loud. Everybody online and in the room can hear me. I continue to get comments from the public, in particular after meetings, saying, hey, I couldn't hear that, so I will redouble my efforts, and forgive me up front now, board members. If I can't hear you well enough, I'm going to say, excuse me, board member, would you mind speaking up a little bit, please? So don't take it personal. Just I want to make sure that the folks in the room and those that are on Zoom can hear you. I have spoken, as you all know, at length with the church about what are they going to do from a sound and amplification issue in the room. Their plans are effectively on hold at this point. They had a committee together. I gave them my input, and so as far as this room is concerned, short of directors bringing in their own microphones, it's kind of what we got is what we're going to have. So maybe the board wants to consider moving anyway. I think it could be managed, particularly if we have a good microphone, and we work with the public to maybe, particularly when we have people that want to stand, in different places, to stand in a single location. We tried that at one meeting, you may recall, back in April or May. People are a little hesitant at times to come up to a microphone, but it may be the only way to do it. Then last but not least, as far as the bullet items on this, the fine-tuning related to agendas and workshops, we do know that we have some workshops coming up, assuming your board agrees with me that in January, February, March, we need to be holding these workshops. Everything I've heard suggests you do, let me be clear. I can facilitate those, let me be clear, but those are so important that we may want to consider a quote-unquote professional facilitator, someone who's used to doing that sort of thing in a public setting, just to make sure it is as smooth as possible. So it's just a seed I want to plant with your board. And then last but certainly not least, the way things work today, and just a reminder down here at the bottom, you don't need to send a note to the entire board to request something be put on the agenda. The President and I set the agenda for each month, unless, of course, the board votes to put something on the agenda, which we can do. So you don't need to send it to everybody. You can just send it to President Fayram and myself. Moving on then, so two kind of sub-bullets under the public outreach and comments. Numerous meetings. For those who attended the forum the other day, there was lots of comments at the election forum about this first bullet, and that is, district residents, property owners, and those that live in and around the district that have concerns about what we're up to, they clearly want more information. I personally would recommend against a second meeting, and you'll see some of those recommendations on the next page. The reason I recommend it, I'd go back to my first slide. If you look at the 30 hours and you said, okay, throw out all the extra hours, I spend, thanks to Director Ross reminding me of this, I spend a little over 30% of my time just managing meetings, which isn't a good use, I think, of district money if we can avoid it. So there may be some other alternatives to formal board meetings that may get the public and those that want to find out more about what we're up to and what it means and ask questions, maybe more effective ways of doing that as opposed to a board meeting where the public's really addressing your board and it's not really a two-way dialogue, it's kind of a one-way dialogue, right? That's how they're set up. And then last but certainly not least, on this slide, we're not really controlling our own message. We're not doing a whole lot to get information out in a written format. We use the meetings, we post the Zoom on our website, occasional document goes out here and there, but we're not really kind of controlling what's being said. And I mean, you don't have to go far. I forget what your comment was. You were asked about the school. I've been asked 3 times this week if the district's boundaries have changed in the last week. And every time I say no, the district boundaries still end at 154. It's people who live or are interested in parcels north of 154 saying, oh, I hear I've been annexed to the district. No, the district boundaries have not changed. We have not agendized. I don't see us agendizing changing the district boundaries anytime soon.
It's not a district decision. It's a LAFCO.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, we'd still have to have a conversation here about it first, right? So point is, there are lots of comments out there, and that's just a small example of, the word gets out there, and people suddenly believe it's true. It's not. I end up fielding a couple of those kinds of emails every day. So more of a push as opposed to a wait and respond may be appropriate. So with that, here are at least 4 recommendations that I would put to the board. You can call it what you want. This was what I spoke to Director Palmer during my kind of interview for this position when she was president. I thought that having some sort of rotating 2 directors, so we don't have to worry about the Brown Act, 2 directors in a constant place regularly, much like some folks are doing right now for other reasons, where people could come, board members can listen to what's being said, answer questions, not just based on one person's opinion or what have you. You've got at least 2 board members there. I'm happy to participate if your board wants me to. You can share information, there could be general discussion, much more of that 2-way conversation as opposed to, again, this tends to be a unidirectional sort of conversation at board meeting. The next one here that I listed is another thing that I spoke to Director Palmer, then President Palmer about. As a general manager, if you wanted me to, I'll start walking the district and talk to all of our neighbors. That's certainly an option. We all fall, I think, into the trap of, we have our circle of friends, or the people who live on our block. For such a small community, it's my impression that we're pretty divided by, streets like Grand and Allen Potato and Santa Barbara Street. You're north of this, you're on that side. Just the way our community's laid out, we tend to either talk to the people that we interact with because we work in the community, or they're our neighbors, or my kid went to school with their kids, so they're my friends. So what I'm suggesting with this one is break those little molds that we've all fallen into and spend more time out in the district. And again, if your board were to direct it and say, hey guy, we want you to spend, making this up, 8 hours a month walking the district, I'll be happy to do that, but I don't have the time to do it in my current contract. Similarly, we have a Nextdoor account. We don't have a Facebook account. I created a Nextdoor account just because personal feelings about Facebook. I figured Nextdoor tends to be even more local than many of the other Facebook kind of social media presences that you can have. So we could and maybe should increase our social media presence. You know, if your board directed me, look, I want you to spend up to 4 or 5 hours, which I think would be a reasonable amount of time a month, pushing messages out through social media, even if it's just here's the meeting, here's a recap of the meeting, here's the issues we'll be talking about, just kind of the normal banter you have on social media. I think that would be a good thing. It might also help, again, get your board's message out to the public and help the general public understand what we're up to. We've got several people on the Zoom tonight, but if you look, I think there are about 20 in the room here, and maybe 4 on Zoom, 25 people out of, let's call it 800 that, we're going to be interacting with that are either directly in the district or immediately surrounding the district. 25 out of 800, that's not a huge presence. And then I mentioned this at the outset during my director's comments. Thank you to District Engineer Pike for reminding me of what we call these in the city. I do plan on doing a state of the district. This is not a board meeting, so it can be a little more dynamic. Your board won't be sitting up there doing like we've done. It'll be very much a presentation from Guy, maybe some interaction with the public, certainly hang around to answer questions. I think particularly timely, in my opinion, and obviously if your board said, hey Guy, we don't want you to do that, I won't do it, but I don't think you're going to tell me that. But I'm planning for December, and I think that time is totally appropriate. Again, barring President Fayram's earlier comments, we should have a new board seated in December. It'll be an opportunity for us all to remember in some cases the history of what we did to get us from I'll call it 17 with the formation of the district, through 2018 with the formation, all the way up to 2020, the end of 22, right? So we'll have roughly 4 to 5 years worth of history, some of the major steps we took, what's happened along the way, provide just general information about what is a step tank, what is a gravity fed, again, just kind of setting the groundwork, both for existing board members who may have forgotten things, new board members who may not have known it, and public who may not have ever heard it before. I'll talk about some of the issues I know about. We can talk about accomplishments and in that, and then those who attend this might be the same people at that, but they will see a slightly different version of the working draft I showed during my comments, just to say, okay, here's where we're at, here's where we're going, and it'll be a little more in depth than what you hear when I give my general manager's comments. So there's 4 things that I would recommend to your board to consider and discuss. Again, in all cases, if you want me to spend more time doing those, I'm happy to do it. If you want me to do it within my existing contract, something else is going to have to give. If you want me to do it in addition to, I'm happy to do that. I will say though, I took this role assuming it'd be 30 to 50 hours a month, and it would ebb and flow a little bit. If you start asking me to do more than about 50 hours a month, I'm going to want to have a conversation with you about what that really means and should I be doing the work, most importantly. There may be other things that if you get to that number of hours, we should be giving to M&S or someone else to do some of that work in maybe a more cost-effective and efficient manner. So with that, I'm happy to take questions from your board.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Savage. I'll just say one thing on the meetings. We hold the meetings on this time because we get a advantage of our district council who we share the costs with Isla Vista, and so moving the meeting unless there was absolutely no other place to go, I think would be problematic, and maybe problematic for council as well. So and questions from the board.
Well, just on that subject alone, for a completely unrelated issue, I was looking at the Grange to be able to use because it's empty. It's used on weekends and different times for entertainment, but it's been taken over by a California Grange that's away from the local people now. But I'm still looking into it because I've used it before, again, for another reason a long time ago. And that might be something, since it's run by the state now, might be something we could make use of. I'll pursue that what I'm doing just to get information as it could be an option. It's not that far away.
I do. So first of all, I appreciate you putting this together and sharing it with the public and with us. And I agree on the outreach. And I think one of the things we struggle with is because we have a limited budget and we've got a limited amount of time for you. How do we best maximize your skills and your time spent on the district? And so we did, the coffee clutch, I do think doing office hours, we also don't have a building, we don't have an office, right? Because we're on a shoestring. And so I think doing that regular office hours with a rotation, whether it's once every week or once every 2 weeks, particularly going into this phase we're headed into, which should be pretty high touch and engagement, as we're narrowing in on a solution. So I'd be in favor of that and happy to work with you on that or whatever we need to do to make that happen. On the social media, again, I think it's a good idea if we give you a budget, but again, as I look at these guys, I'm thinking maybe you come back with a recommendation, and if it takes additional, you think it's going to take additional time, do we find that somewhere else in the budget, or is there a contract way to do it? Because they're all needed, but again, from a prioritization of time and resources, we have to be creative on how we accomplish them. And I do like the idea of the state of the district, so I look forward to that.
I would echo all of those comments.
I think when you have social media is fine. I'm not sure that gets to who we're all trying to get, depending on how that is. I don't know that much about next door. When you do send a letter to everybody in the district, that at least it's in their mailbox, so maybe that needs some more dialogue on what the effectiveness is and what the best approach would be. And then of course cost. I mean, we do have to be sensitive to that. I'm not sure that any of these are a huge cost, with the exception of what your time is. And I want to be sensitive to your time. Your contract's for 30 hours, and the fact that you've been doing more is a tribute to your sense of community, but we also have to be fair on that as well. So, any more comments? Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Savage. That was very, very helpful. And that brings us to item 8, adjournment. Do I have a motion?
I'm sorry, I had a public comment.
It's
public comment.
Agenda is an action, so public comment.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Again, I also thank you very much, Mr. Savage. It's super helpful, and it's so good to see some focus on more outreach. I would say, some of the problem with the district not controlling its own message has been perception, not just by me, but others in the community, that when the board has been given ample opportunity to try to answer direct questions, we haven't gotten direct answers. And there's a lot of let's meet one-on-one and I'll answer that. But if it's public information that all of us should have, it's really common practice for a board to come back and answer the question in the next general meeting, and that's simply never happened here. And that's a really economical way to get information out, is to just share it in a public forum. And in terms of the cost, it's a really great point. And what came up at the forum the other night was the fact that you have a lot of really engaged, skilled citizens right here in your district who would be more than willing to volunteer their time and help do the social media piece or put together flyers, and they'll do it for free. So if you were willing to engage the public and really let them be a part of the process, you could save a lot of money by using the resources we've already got here. You've got human capital and you're not utilizing it. So if the board would also consider ways to actually let the community step in and carry some of the weight with you, that would probably be a really good, productive option. And then I would just, I wanted to note, because I noted this slide where it said there have been tweaks to the agenda format, and then a reminder the agenda set by Fayram and Savage. And, you know, one of the tweaks that has happened to the agendas in the last few months is that a call for agenda items was taken off of every agenda. It has been there for the last 4-something years and it disappeared. And if you really wanted to get input from the public, that's a real easy line to just put back on your agenda. And then additionally, the fact that the agenda is set by President Fayram and Mr. Savage is great in terms of what you all on the board can do, but people from the community are emailing and asking for topics to be taken up for the board and asking for things to be put on the agenda, and they're being told no. So if we could figure out a way, and I have copies of those emails, many of them, saying no. So, or just an absolute deafening silence, no response at all when things are requested. Or like Mr. Fayram, when you told me you were going to address something in the July meeting and you've never ever responded to any of those questions. So, listen, I know you're trying to do a lot with a little, but you know, really consider using the resources you have and taking input from the public and actually responding to it in a public forum so people know what's going on. But thank you, Mr. Savage.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just kind of build on what I was saying about the community outreach. Just want to make sure, obviously this weekend's Day and Country. I won't be here over the rodeo with my daughter. But if any of the candidates, board members, if any of you guys want to set up in the park, you know, to talk to, more than welcome to use the local Campbell Park. The chambers and have a few things there. The park's open, so if you guys want to set up a table or whatever, more than welcome to. It's a great opportunity to talk to people. And then her mentioning you know, guys now in office. I know the benefit of actually having a physical location to like hang things on the wall and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just thinking there are the school's gone a couple times, but there are some abandoned classrooms at the school that are full of junk. In case the district wanted to approach the school about using one of those as a potential place to store stuff or whatever, just an idea, you know, with all the studies and everything like that, being able to have visualized, or if you have meetings with someone, they come in, you can show them. It's just could be another option. So put that out there. And then the comment about the school earlier that was on Zoom is years ago when Lisa was on the school board, and Julie might have been on the school board, there was discussion back then about possibly using the school as a site for some sort of system. And one of the things, as a school board member, we're currently looking at putting a well in because we spend about $3,000 a month in water. So that's where when we were creatively discussing after seeing this town hall, we were saying, hey, I wonder if the school could use some of that water. We wouldn't have to put it in a well, you could use recycled water. So it was more of that kind of creativity discussion, which I think we need probably more of at this point, because there may be some great stuff that pops up. All right, good deal. Thanks.
All right.
Sorry. One other thing.
Still have a minute.
Town historian who's been here since 1908. He's not paying attention, but Mike McCarty whispered in my ear that the site that we're thinking of for that test well was also where the railroad shack was, and a whole lot of stuff was dumped there. So just thinking there, it may be contaminated, or you may have maybe drill it last, or the guy may have run into a piece of steel and break his bit. And so just, I don't think that's a great location for a whole lot of reasons, but, right, is that true? Yeah. 1908, historical knowledge. 1908 or 6. And he's Danish, so he wouldn't want to, never mind. Call me that.
Brings us to item number 8, adjournment. We have a motion to adjourn at 8:19. Second. Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you.